pilot!
We've got one!
You! What about that ship?
That one's garbage! The garbage will do.
Ken Spriggs here with part 9 of my Bandai 144 Millennium Falcon and Jakku diorama. A lot of great work done this week on the diorama. I have the desert sand pretty much all completed. The AT-AT mostly completed as well, and the Millennium Falcon stand built as well for that. So let's get right to it. Let me show you the great progress that I made. All right, so I started painting the AT-AT walker to begin my initial paint coats, and then start with the weathering and the rusting. So I thought about doing a black base to begin with, but a better idea was to use this Hull red, which is kind of a rust color. It's a dark red. So the idea of doing a black base is to get into the little detail, especially in this whole area. So when you do the outer coat, the recessed parts and the detail retains the dark color. In this case, I wanted to retain some rust, so I decided to go with the Hull red instead. And so I painted a lot inside the bottom of it, and then on the legs and the outer part. So I'm going to let that dry, and then once that dries completely, I'm going to do like a light misting of the gray that would go on it, and I want a lot of the red, the dark Hull red, to stick through, so it looks like it's rusted underneath it, and then weather the rest of it on top. So I'll let that dry, and then I'll go ahead and get a coat of a gray on there, a light gray, and then we can start weathering it. All right. All right, so I have the AT-AT sitting there for now. It's still drying, but I really like that Hull red. It really looks all rusted. So I'm probably going to start with a real light misting of the gray over it, just to leave most of that red showing, and then we'll do some of the oils and the weathering and the powders. So I put down a few more sand dune sections, and because I found this smooth finish like foam paste, it's really nice. What I applied yesterday and let it dry, it feels like foam and it sands down really easily. So what I'm going to do is I put down 2 more pieces, but I didn't make them as pronounced as this one. As you can see, I left some flat edges on the outer edges, so what I'll do is use the foam to build it up, spread it out, smooth it down onto the base, and the same thing here. Smooth it out, smooth down this part so that it melds in more naturally, and use that for more of it. And then I can use some of that on some of these flat parts to just smooth it down and make some peaks on it for sand. All right, so that's looking pretty cool. I did glue down this rock and this little rock for now in these 2 sections. The other 4 I'm going to leave for now until I finish the rest of the contouring, and then I'll get an idea where that's going to go. I've already sort of mapped out that the little pole in this general area, I'm going to have to cut out a section to stick the rod up to support the Millennium Falcon, which will be in this general area right here. That's the heaviest of the kits, so I'm going to actually cut out a square, and I'm thinking about getting like a block of wood and really embedding that in there so I can glue it down and make it nice and solid, because it's got a lot of weight to it, especially with the batteries in it. The TIE fighters are fairly light, so I can probably have a little metal rod coming up out of this direction, or probably this direction, when I decide on where to put those 2, because they'll be chasing the Falcon. So, all right, but those won't be any problem, and I can put those down in fairly simply into the styrofoam. Okay, so I'm going to let all this dry for right now, including the AT-AT, and then I'll start some more painting on it, some more weathering. And this is coming along really good. Alright, so I did most of the application of the kind of the foam putty around each of those styrofoams, and it's a little bit rough. Once it dries, I can sand it smoother. It's pretty delicate, so I didn't want to try getting it too smooth. I actually made a little ridge right there just out of that foam. It's a little trickier, but other than that, the other ridges, I've got them ready to go and drying. And I really like that flat hull red on the AT-AT. I think that looks really, really cool. And it's really close to what I want it to be. So what I'm going to do is, rather than spraying more of the gray over it, I'm going to probably do like a light gray wash. I'll kind of play with it a bit. But I want to maintain most of that rusted out look. And there's the foot with some damage on it. Lying there alone. But that's pretty cool. I really like that rusted look. And if I can get some different shades and hues, that's really close to what I want it to be. Alright, so I'll let that dry as well. And I'm just going to let this whole thing set overnight and harden up. But that's looking really good. I think I have some nice contours. I did a little bit of trying some ridges in the sand, some waviness. We'll kind of see. I'll sand that down a bit, similar to this over here. And keep in mind that all of this is going to be covered in sand and some rocks and things like that. These are going to be painted rocks. And those I still have to position somewhere. But it's coming along really good. So let me let that all settle overnight, and we'll come back to it and see what else we can do. All right, so I'm working on the attachment for the stand for the Millennium Falcon onto the diorama, and I'm not really using the entire kit section, but I am using the one piece here, which has these 3 pegs that click into the Falcon. It's a nice connection. So I drilled through it as I showed in the previous clips, and I used some 5-minute epoxy to secure this brass rod into it. I'm not quite sure the thickness of it, but it's solid enough to hold the Falcon in place from the base here, because it's a fairly hefty kit. The TIE Fighters I'm not quite as worried about. They can use a much smaller brass tubing because they're very light, but the Falcon does have a little bit of weight to it. It's not really heavy, but with the batteries and the lights I put in it, it does have some heft to it. So what I've done is I've cut out a square into the styrofoam base, and I cut out a piece of plywood that fits into that square. And so once I figure out the length of it, I'm going to cut off this brass tubing to be the right length, and I'm going to drill a hole through this wood and glue it in with some 5-minute epoxy, as well as gluing this into the base, because it has to be solid in order to not move around too much. And this is too long, it's going to be cut shorter. So let me work on that. Now that I have this square cut out, I'm ready to draw out a hole in the wood and figure out how long the brass tube needs to be, and then we'll get that glued in place. Once I do that, then this is going to actually be pressed down in here below the styrofoam, and I'll put some 5-minute epoxy underneath it, as well as some of the styrofoam glue over top of it, so I can cover that in and it's nice and stable. It's not going to go anywhere, and give me a nice solid connection. once I have that done, then I'm ready to start working on the painting of the diorama, a little bit more sanding of this, and then I'm ready to start painting it and then putting the sand material. Okay. So here's the finished supports for the Falcon in the stand, and I've used some brass tubing. I believe it's 1/8 thickness, and I already put some of the smooth on over top of that and let that harden. So I'm ready to start smoothing that down. But these are both pretty solid. They are glued down into the base and into a block of wood. And as I showed in the previous shots, I just filled that up with 5-minute epoxy. And I ended up going with 2 of them. I had just the one for the support that comes with the kit, and it was a little wobbly, so I put a second one in, and I'm using one of the kit parts from the landing gear, as you can see. So it just goes into the spot where the landing gear is. So let me get that attached and I'll show you what that's going to look like. Alright, so there's the kit secured from underneath. And this will be the back of the diorama. So it won't be as visible. And you can see it's supported in the landing gear and in the stand connector that came with the kit. Alright, and then if I turn it around, alright, so you can see like it's just a little wobbly, but it stops real quick, and it's in the flight position that I want it to be in. So it's flying sideways, and you can get a really cool shot of the top of it. And then I'll have the TIE fighters somewhere back in this area, and they'll be supported by a single, probably much thinner, either tube or piece of solid rod, because they're very light, so they don't need as much support as the Falcon does. And then the AT-AT collapsed in the back there. So when it's in position, and those are going to be painted the sand color, the radome tan as well, to kind of blend them in somewhat, so they'll be fairly unnoticeable once I get everything all done, and the rest of this is a sand color. So I wanted it kind of in that position so that you can see the top of it, and certainly from the side you can see the rear engine grille, and the other side you can see the cockpit. So I want it to be in a position where you could see the main parts that I've lit up, especially also the gunner stations. And then if you want to, you can look around the back and see the bottom, because I have those landing lights. So, alright, so now that that's completed and I have the stand in position, I'm ready to go ahead and finish up the sanding. We'll start working on that now, and then I'll be able to get on with the painting and the sand materials. Alright. Alright, so I got a coat of the radome tan acrylic airbrushed on top of it, and I just want to give it that light tan look before I put on the model railroad materials, the sand materials. In case there's any patchy spots, it won't look at the white styrofoam behind it. So I taped off the area for the AT-AT walker, and I just put in some Kleenex down into the 2 spots for the legs and the head up here, because I don't want to get sand down inside there. I'm going to glue the kit down into there, and I want it to have a solid base for the styrofoam. So and I started with a light coating on these brass rods as well, and they need touched up a bit, so they'll kind of blend in. So I'm now ready to start applying the materials, and I built this little makeshift box to put it in, a little TV box that I had, so if the materials or the glue go down around it, which it won't go all over the place, and I can keep it contained. So so what you use generally is this material called scenic cement, which you can brush it on, you can put it in a spray bottle. It's really thin, as you can see. It's almost like the consistency of milk. And you soak it down. You just soak all of the material, and then you leave it sit overnight or so, and it just hardens it right down into it. None of it comes loose. You're not going to get the flaking off, or the little bits falling off, because this, although it looks like sand, it really isn't sand. It's almost like a sawdust material in a way, but it's made to look like sand. It's kind of cool. All right, so there's the sand, and I have several packs of that. I also have some gravel, which I might concentrate in smaller spots to be like a rougher patch with some rocks. And I also have rocks, which I can do as well in different sizes. They look pretty cool. And of course I have the resin rocks that I'm going to paint as the larger ones. But in this scale, these are pretty gigantic, because there's the foot of the AT-AT. So a person's really tiny. So these are giant boulders. I also have, and I'm debating on whether I'm going to use it or not, a little bit of green. So I have some of this green here and the lighter to highlight it on top. If I do, I'm just going to do really small patches, maybe around some of the rocks, because you would have a little bit of green here and there, but mostly it's just going to be stark desert. So, all right, so let me go ahead and start getting that applied, and this is coming along great. Okay, so I got a lot of the sand material onto the diorama, as you can see here. There's still some patchy spots, so I'm going to put some more onto it. I had to pick up some more of it. You can see right there, I still have to get a little bit more as well. And but I wanted to go ahead and put the Falcon and the AT-AT walker on here to see how that's going to bring out those colors. The plain sand, I have a little bit of variations in colors, but it looks kind of bland and drab until you get these other things on here, and they bring out a little more of the contrast between the rusted out AT-AT, the grays of the Falcon, and likewise once I get the rocks painted, those are going to bring out some more character as well. But it's looking pretty good, as you can see. That's a nice combination of those, and the Falcon looks good on its little stand of the two brass rods, and you can kind of see them back there, but they're going to be fine as far as it being suspended. And then the AT-AT's looking really good with the rust compared to the sand colors. I think that looks pretty cool. And I still have to do some more weathering on that as well. That's not completed yet. All right, so that's all coming together very well. Get some more sand here and get some more coating on it, and I think that's going to look pretty amazing. All right, so I got more of the same material, and I'm getting a thicker coat onto it, and that's looking really good. In order to get it to stay onto the ridges, I actually have it propped up, as you can see, and I did different parts of it. So I had it upside down once, then I had it straight up and down long ways, so I can get each of the edges, all these edges, the top of this, the bottom of this, same with this one, this little ridge, and then the bottom ridge. So right now I have the last of the I guess I would say the vertical sand dunes done. I'm just letting that dry, kind of give you a look from here and get around the other side of it. And I just have it propped up against appropriately enough, the AT-AT box down there is holding it in place. And so you can kind of see from here that that's getting a nice coating of the sand, and it's really starting to bring those out to look like they're real mounds of sand, real sand dunes. So that's pretty cool. And there in the back as well. Alright, so I'm going to let this dry overnight. I'm going to leave it upright here for a while until it solidifies. And as you can see, I just have the glue in a cup with a brush, and that's just easier to just swab it on in heavy coats. And then I have the sand mixture in another cup, and I just sprinkle it on top so I can get that get it to coat nice and well. Most of it's going to stick, but once it dries sufficiently in a few hours, I'll just tilt it down and a little bit will spill off. And then once I'm done with all the edges, which I am, and it dries overnight, I'll go ahead and lay it flat, and then I'll just finish up all the bare spots in the flat part right here. And that'll finish up all the sand. And then I'll be ready to go ahead and start painting the rocks. I'm still not decided whether I'm going to use any of the gravel or the rocks. I want to get it all together with the AT-AT first and just kind of see how it's going to look, and then we'll go from there and get the rocks painted, because those are going to bring out a lot more of the color in this diorama. So it's coming along really, really well, and I even managed to get some sand onto those brass rods, as you can see. So just a little bit, so it kind of lets it blend in a little bit more into the scenery. So okay, all right, and we'll let that dry overnight, and then I'm going to get the final sand onto the flat parts, and then we'll go further with it. All right. Okay, so this is pretty much the final coating of the sand. I have it soaked down pretty well with the scenic glue and letting that dry. And as you can see, I took the masking tape and also the tissue out from where the AT-AT walker is going to go. And you can see the difference there. That's just the white styrofoam versus the sand. So that's a pretty drastic change there. And that's looking really good. I can still touch up a few spots when I'm done, but I'm pretty much getting ready to glue in the AT-AT and start weathering it. And I'm going to glue that in with some 5-minute epoxy there, as you can see. And then once I get it solid in there, I'll put sand around it so that it looks like it's buried in the sand. All right, but in the meantime, I wanted to start to play with some of the weathering of the AT-AT. So I have that right here. And I'm going to try a little bit of like a gray wash to show that some of the detail hasn't quite rusted, lighten it up a bit. I also have my oils. I have a dark and light rust, which I'm going to use. And I can lighten those up a bit to put some streaks on it. I just want to try it a little bit first before I glue it in, and then once it's on the display, I can always do more weathering, and that's probably what I'll do. And I'm going to have some debris around it on the sand that I'm going to paint and weather as well. All right, so let me try some weathering on the AT-AT, and just about ready to get that glued onto the display. All right, so I started with a little bit of a wash of a royal light gray. And I thinned it out quite a bit, and just washed it over the whole kit into the detail, and then wiped most of it off. So it gives it a little bit of a lighter profile rather than a stark red. And then I'm going to darken it down again with some of the other rusts and reds, so it looks like it's a different contrast. So that's kind of cool. Let that dry a few minutes here, and then I'll start using some of the oils to put some streaks on it and that kind of thing. Here's the foot, or one of the feet, that's going to be standalone. It's been battle damaged, so okay, cool. All right, so I will let that dry a bit. I'm going to go ahead and use some of my Abteilung 502. These are really, really nice oils. I like them a lot. They go on pretty well. If you thin them down, they give a nice, really streaking wash. So I'm going to use some of the light rust and the dark rust. And get that look. So what I also did, and I don't think I mentioned this in the previous videos, but the internal workings, like that piece right there, I pulled it out and glued it in place as if it's kind of falling out. And I did the same with the one in the front. So it almost kind of gives the look, and you know, pardon kind of the grossness, but the like his innards are coming out. And that's kind of what it looks like. It looks almost like an animal, like it's been crashed and everything's fallen apart and it's died. Its head's propped down. So I glued those sticking out because that's what it would be. And then that center section right there, that's where I believe they entered in to get into it. And half of this is going to be buried. So you're not going to see all of that, but you are going to see the part above, and it's going to look really cool. So, okay, let me get a little bit more weathering on there. And I just want to do some initial weathering, and then I'll be ready to get it glued onto the diorama. All right, so the next thing I did is I applied some Nuln oil from Citadel. I've seen a lot of videos online on YouTube with this, and it's really cool. It's just basically like a really dark, greasy wash. And it's really good because it goes into the little spots and fills it in. You can see how it kind of darkened that and gave it a little more character. So I'll let that dry a little bit. Yeah, so that's looking really good. It looks really rusted, but there's some detail shining through as well. So there's the little foot where Ray lives. Well, she sits actually. So I'm gonna let that dry a little bit, and then I'm gonna put on some of the light and dark rust and put some streaks on that, and then I'll be ready to glue it on. Okay. All right, so there's the initial weathering of the AT-AT. I used several of the oils and watered them down quite a bit and put some thicker ones on and brushed it down. And I'm just letting that dry right now. So you can see I got some deeper reds and rusts and different colors on there, so that looks pretty cool. And right now it's still drying, so it'll look better once that sheen is off of there and it's dried. But I'm gonna stop with that right now. That's pretty cool. Because once that dries, I'm gonna go ahead and glue it down onto the diorama, and then I can do some more weathering. That turned out pretty cool. That's pretty neat. I might use some powders as well. We'll see. Because I have some red rust powders and some of my Tamiya weathering masters as well. So I might put some of those on there once I get it on. Because some of the rust will fall down off onto the sand, so I'll have some rust around it. And like I said, some little mini parts. I'm going to have little bits and pieces of the metal that have come off, or the different scavengers on Jakku have also pulled different parts out. So, but that looks pretty cool. I like that. Maybe good. That's a good shot of that. All right, so I'm going to let that dry, and then I'm going to go ahead and get that put onto the base and glue it down with some 5-minute epoxy. All right, it's coming along really well. All right, so I've gotten that to dry mostly, and that looks really, really nice. A bit of a sheen still, but it's drying pretty well. That's pretty cool. I have the extra foot, the loose foot, I should say, glued in. And I used, as I said, 5-minute epoxy, got it glued down in there, and I put a little bit of the sand around it over top of the glue while that's drying. Alright, so that's pretty cool. Alright, so let me go ahead and get the main AT-AT put in. And that should be pretty awesome. And then we'll go ahead and get this all wrapped up. Alright, so I have the AT-AT glued down. A few of the parts are still finishing up. I put some of the styrofoam glue around to fill in the edges and put some sand over it. Once that hardens in completely overnight, I'll put some more sand and use the scenic cement to glue it down. There's the back of it. Alright, so let me go ahead and just put the Millennium Falcon on a stand, and we'll kind of get an idea of how that's going to look. And we'll wrap this video up for this week. Alright, there we go. So there's the Millennium Falcon in flight over Jakku. And there's the crashed and rusted AT-AT Walker. And I have my sand dunes, and I still have to paint the rocks, obviously, and then get the TIE fighters completed and get those put on there as well. But this is coming along excellently, so it looks really, really good. You get a kind of a top shot of that. There we go. That's pretty awesome. Alright, so I'll keep working on the weathering on the Falcon, get the TIE fighters completed and put onto the display, get the rocks painted, and then maybe a little more scenery. We'll see if I want some grass or anything like that on there. So, but alright, but looking excellent. Really like how that AT-AT Walker is turning out there. And I'll be doing some more weathering. Like I said, I'll have some bits of metal and little flecks around it and little parts as well once that's done. Okay, fantastic. Alright, so I will see everybody next week. And thanks to all my subscribers, coming up on 100 here shortly at 99 subscribers. So thank you, everyone, and keep watching, and we'll get this wrapped up here in probably another week or two. Alright, thanks everyone.